one of whether or not the prologue to death holiday dirges from certain TV epidemiologists will continue to be the norm into Christmas, and if Tony Fauci is any indication, they will be.
Can't see how we're not going to have the same thing, because when you have the kind of inflection that we have, it doesn't all of a sudden turn around like that. So clearly we're going to have the same sort of thing, and perhaps even 2 or 3 weeks down the line, Martha, we may see a surge upon a surge. We don't want to frighten people,
surge.
but that's just the reality. We said that these things would happen as we got into the cold weather and as we began traveling, and they've happened. It's going to happen again. So I cannot see all of a sudden a relaxation of the kinds of recommendations or restrictions, because we're getting into colder weather and in an even larger holiday season as people travel to come back and forth for Christmas. So I don't see a relaxation of the kind of recommendations and restrictions that we've made.
Yeah, well, you're seeing an increasing resistance there, Dr. Fauci, and when you lose the French...
Uh-oh.
Thousands of Parisians out in force over the weekend chanting Liberté, because at least some recognize you can have no égalité or fraternité without liberté.
Nicely done.
Thank you very much. And also protests in London, in New York City.
New York City?
New York City. Staten Island Pub has declared itself an autonomous zone.
That's awesome.
If it's good enough for the center of Seattle, I love when you hoist the left by their own petard, so to speak.
What's their name?
Max Public House in Grand City has declared themselves an autonomous zone. The liquor license has been suspended. They don't care. They're serving liquor anyway, and they're just taking donations. So you don't actually have to pay for the liquor. This is like the episode of Cheers where Rebecca forgot to renew the liquor license, and so they just gave away drinks. So they weren't in violation of the law. It's getting a little silly, but underlying some of the silliness is real seriousness, which is people's lives and livelihoods are on the line.
Yeah, I remember the motto, a virtual Thanksgiving means you won't have an ICU Christmas.
Yeah, right. Hallmark for the misanthrope sort of messaging. I get it, but some people have had enough of taking it. And, this is going to continue to get increasingly tense, even ironically, as I said at the outset, with the distribution of one or more of the vaccines in the offing. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined again by Dr. Roger Klein, expert with the Regulatory Transparency Project's FDA and Health Working Group, former director of molecular oncology at the Cleveland Clinic, former advisor to the FDA, CDC, CMS, and HHS as well. Dr. Klein, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, hi, Dan. Hi, Amy.
Hello. So let's start with vaccines. So Pfizer, BioNTech, they're going to be good to go this week in the UK, it is reported. Moderna seeking emergency use authorization here. Where is the FDA in processing Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and getting those vaccines on the street in America?
So I think they'll move relatively quickly. Under the current administration, I think they'll continue to encourage them to, for example, work through the weekend. I expect we're going to have these vaccines in the next few weeks here. They do have to go through data, and we make light of it, but they actually we do want to make sure that we fully understand these vaccines. They appear to be effective, at least in some measure, and maybe extraordinarily effective. But we want to make sure that they don't do harm as well. So I think I expect that FDA is going to turn them out. I saw a report that supposedly some of the Pfizer vaccines are in Chicago already.
Well, United Airlines is getting ready to ship them. But yeah, I'm looking for that right now. That was news yesterday, and I can't find it today. But I know that United Airlines is ready to help out.
Well, it's great news. And it's going to be a while to get it to the general population. Of course, a lot of people probably won't choose to take it anyway. But I think to getting it out to healthcare workers, getting out to vulnerable populations, that'll happen within the next few weeks to months, and I think will do much to at least reduce the mortality from the disease, which is, I think, what we're really going for.
Yeah, speaking of mortality, were you aware of this controversy that bubbled up over the weekend about this research coming out of Johns Hopkins, a student in the Applied Economics Master's program at Johns Hopkins who looked at some of the mortality data from CDC, and essentially her conclusion was what we see compared to historically this time of year and then on an annualized basis is not necessarily excess death with respect to COVID, but rather deaths from other causes being recategorized as COVID deaths, deaths from respiratory illness, deaths from heart disease being recategorized as COVID. And, I don't see there was any particular political agenda about it. She's just sort of crunching numbers as an economics project or econometric project. And yet Johns Hopkins took this research down, suggesting that not that the data was inaccurate, but that it could lead to misleading conclusions, although they offered no alternative conclusions from the data. And it just speaks to sort of the larger issue of research that you don't like, the implications of research you don't like. You just eliminate the research if there's the right political pressure.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I heard this, and I didn't look into it in great detail, but others have reported that excess mortality, and particularly in the older age groups, it isn't what one might expect from hearing news reports about COVID-19, and does support the idea, along with other CDC reported data, that most folks have comorbidities. And so, if people would, so a lot of the people who have died probably would have died anyway within a year. I hate to, I'm not trying to be callous about it, but I think that there's a lot we have to learn. But when something strikes elderly people, and people who are really old are the ones most at risk, those folks don't have a long lifespan ahead of them anyway. So I don't. It's not hard to understand that. And I agree with you. Look, science and medicine is not immune to political influences the same way everybody else is. And I was reading Cheryl Atkinson's book. I've started her new book this weekend, and about Slanted, it's called. And it's really
we had her on last week.
Yeah, it's a great book for somebody like me, to come in and the idea that these narratives don't influence science and medicine, I think is that would be misplaced. We try to be objective, but we're not outside society. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and Doctor, you're correct. United Airlines has begun shipping first batches of the vaccine to their hubs, and they're just waiting for the FDA's approval. Why does the FDA seem to be dragging their feet on this?
Yes, they have you could call it dragging their feet. Usually they would take months. So I'm not sure if they're dragging their feet. I think they need to thoroughly review the data. I don't think they can simply, I know they can't simply just rubber stamp something that's sent to them. So I think we have to give them a few weeks to look at it. I don't think it's reasonable to expect people not to do their work, and hopefully they're getting enough pressure to put in the hours to make sure that they do the job properly, but efficiently and effectively and rapidly.
By the way, I wouldn't go around telling other of your colleagues that you're reading Cheryl Atkinson's book Slanted if you want to be invited to Tony Fauci's Zoom happy hour. So I just, some political. You give the medical advice, I'll give the political advice. So what about Tony Fauci? I know he is still the oracle of infectious diseases in the West, but This, the statements you heard at the top about, Christmas is going to be like Thanksgiving, is going to be like next Thanksgiving, is going to be like next Christmas. It's it's not just doom and gloom. I mean, to some extent, he's the boy who cried wolf, isn't he? I mean, yes, there were predictions about there could be a second wave in the winter. Right, a lot of predictions about that. So then what we did in the run-up to that second wave was ineffectual, or we shouldn't have stopped the total lockdowns we were in the spring, or what is it exactly? They're sort of predicting things after the fact and pretending like they saw it all along.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, look, we've known all along this is a contagious respiratory virus. Most people who have it don't know they have it. So of course it spreads pretty readily, and once people spend more time indoors together, you're gonna see increased spread. So I don't think any of this is really a surprise. You will note that the death rate, at least certainly based on reported cases, has continued to fall. I think the hospitalizations are up, but people they're not going to intensive care units the way they did. And I think so. I think Dr. Fauci's representing a perspective that I guess I take issue with to some extent, as we've discussed in the past. I think there isn't all that much we can do, unfortunately, to prevent this virus, and I think people are protecting themselves in many respects. So older, sicker people are tending to avoid contact with others. That's part of the reason the death rate's falling, and the infections are skewing toward younger people, which, as some have pointed out, could in fact protect elderly people, because as more and more people get infected, the virus has fewer places to go, and then it more or less ultimately burns out. So I think we need to take a balanced approach. Life cannot stop. We can't shut down the world for 2 years for a virus that for most people represents a benign illness.
And what about, the kids? Do you think children will ever get vaccinated? Is there even a need for that?
Yeah, I mean, I do it. I think it would be last, and it's kind of a controversial point. I mean, we don't really know. We don't have great long-term data on side effects. I don't want to scare people, because I think the risk versus benefits of getting the vaccine for many people certainly are in favor of the vaccine. But I don't think we have complete data, and I think there's definitely it definitely will make people feel sick. So I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it certainly shouldn't be the highest priority. And look, if you were 25 years old, I don't know how old you are, but if you were 25, if I were 25, and that's not even a child, I'd kind of say, well, I don't know, do I want to get 2 vaccines, take time out of my life, get sick for a couple days, if that's what it might do, for something that probably represents nothing more than kind of a flu-like illness. I think you'd think twice about it. And I'm not advocating. So please don't yell at me out there if you're upset with this. But I think that you have to understand what people's calculations are, and it's just like we saw the kids in Florida in the spring on spring break, kind of ignoring it. And I think they before anyone else admitted it, they knew that for them it probably wasn't going to be a serious problem.
Well, but what you'll probably have happen to take this out of the realm of choice is mandates on vaccinations in order to do things like go to school. But speaking of kids, though, this the unintended consequences, the opportunity costs that are so little discussed. This in the pages of the New York Times, no less, stunningly, by an immunologist and a pediatrician, or professor of pediatrics at Columbia. Quarantine may negatively affect kids' immune systems. And the authors suggest the world is unwittingly conducting what amounts to the largest immunological experiment in the history on our own children, keeping children inside, sanitizing their living spaces and their hands, and largely isolating them. In doing so, we're preventing large numbers of them from becoming infected or transmitting the virus. But we may also be unintentionally inhibiting the proper development of children's immune systems. And they mention the E word that shall not be spoken of, exposure, and that failing to train our immune systems properly can have serious consequences. And they talk about research both with respect to infants and peanut allergies, as well as respect to mice raised in germ-free conditions versus mice who were not, and so on and so forth. So that not only are we potentially compromising our children's intellectual and social development with school lockdowns, but now we're potentially compromising their life expectancy by negatively impacting their immune systems and the development of their immune systems.
Yeah, so I think that's a real risk. And if you can look back to the Spanish flu epidemic in 1919, 1920, that was an H1N1 type flu virus. And it's hypothesized that part of the reason the H1N1 epidemic that we had just a few years ago wasn't as severe was because it didn't impact elderly people, and the hypothesis is that those folks were infected with a similar strain during the Spanish flu and had immunity. And I think it should be well taken. In other countries, some of the Asian countries, for example, one of the reasons that they may seem to have had fewer problems is because they have more exposures to similar antigens, similar viruses that create cross-reactivity. I can't tell you that for sure, but we all know if we go to some countries and we drink the water, for example, we get sick. The people there don't. We have immune systems for a reason, and I think attempting to shield and put people in bubbles is not. It risks not ensuring proper development of our ability to protect ourselves.
He is Dr. Roger Klein, expert with the Regulatory Transparency Project's FDA and Health Working Group, former director of molecular oncology at the Cleveland Clinic, and former advisor to the FDA, CDC, CMS, and HHS. Dr. Klein, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Fall is the season when structural problems can start in your home. If you're noticing new cracks in your walls or brickwork,